They were rebels with a cause, revolutionary artists set on breaking rules and creating art for art's sake. I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at the Delaware Art Museum checking out a one-of-a-kind exhibit called the Rosettis that you'll only see right here. Get ready, the 302 is headed your way. The Rosettis were revolutionaries in the art world, but there's so many people don't know about them. They're now the subject of an exhibit at the Delaware Art Museum. I'm joined now by Sophie Linford to tell us all about it. Sophie, you are the curator of this amazing exhibit, is that right?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about the Rosettis. Really were a very significant point in art history.
The Rosettis were an Anglo-Italian family in mid-19th century London. Many people, when they hear the last name Rosetti, if you're inclined to art and visual material, you'll think of the name Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who was a founder of the PreRaphaelite Brotherhood and a painter who was known for his later work that features women with this long, lustrous red hair, dreamy, vacant gazes filled with interiors or external scenes with some sumptuous accessories. If you're a person that is familiar with poetry or literature, the Rossetti that you'll most frequently hear of is Christina Rossetti, who was a famous 19th century poet, and during her own time, as well as today, she was far better known than that of her brother, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So this exhibition brings together their work for the first time and that of their siblings, Maria and William Michael Rossetti, and contextualizes their work with each other's and shows how they were collaborating on their painting and their poetry for several decades in the second half of the 19th century.
Now, when we talk about pre-Raphaelite, you're going to have to explain that to us. In my research, it said that basically they were rule breakers, that there was a very mechanical way things were done, and they were like, we don't want to do that. We want to make art for art's sake. Tell us about the difference between before and then their period.
Sure. So there's actually a two-part sort of phase to this movement. We have the pre-Raphaelite movement and we have the aesthetic movement. And the pre-Raphaelite movement was founded by a group of 7 young men. They were all 18, 19, 20 years old. Most of them were friends from the Royal Academy schools in London, which was where artists went to learn how to be an academic style painter. And these artists, Dante Gabriel Rossetti and his 2 friends, William Holman Hunt and John Everett Millay, among a few others, were not pleased with the style of teaching at the Royal Academy. They found it to be just too academic and rigid in their doctrines. So what they did was they were looking to alternative modes of inspiration. And so they were looking back to the art before the Renaissance artist Raphael. They were looking to late medieval and early Renaissance art, which had really sort of simple compositions where all of the action is happening in the foreground. They have vibrant blocks of color, and the figures and sort of accessories, accoutrements in the painting are much more naturalistic. And so that's what the pre-Raphaelite artists were interested in. They were not interested in idealism, which is what they were being taught at the Royal Academy schools. And so because they were interested in that art before the Renaissance artist Raphael, they called themselves the Pre-Raphaelites. And so this title, Pre-Raphaelites, was totally opaque and inaccessible even in their own time, just as it is really doesn't announce what it means today. And so the Pre-Raphaelites had this sort of air of mystery around them in their rejection of mainstream academic painting. The movement that you were referring to with art for art's sake, that's actually the aesthetic movement. Pre-Raphaelite art was very interested in narrative, whether it was depicting art from Shakespeare, from the Bible, from contemporary poetry. And then over the course of the 1860s and 1870s, Dante Gabriel Rossetti started participating in a totally different art movement that strayed from the tenets of Pre-Raphaelitism. And this was the aesthetic movement. And so some of the paintings that you see in this show are from that era of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's work, where he's rejecting narrative and he's just wanting to paint scenes that, and portraits and images that don't tell a story and instead exist for the art alone. And so that's why we call those works art for art's sake.
So anytime you have someone that's breaking rules or doing something different, they're not always an overnight success. Typically, there's a little bit of a, I guess, growing period. Can you talk about how this, the Pre-Raphaelite and then the aesthetic movement, how it was received in the art world?
Sure, the Pre-Raphaelite movement was not received well. For the most part, critics lambasted the style of art that Dante Gabriel Rossetti and his colleagues were putting forward. Really, what they were taking issue with was this precise way that Pre-Raphaelites were painting. So one of the tenets of the Pre-Raphaelite movement was to picture everything exactly as it appeared in nature. And so that meant that their backgrounds were often painted with the same level of detail as their foregrounds. And this is really antithetical to the way that the eye sees things. You don't see objects in the distance with the same optical resolution as you see them in your sort of immediate foreground. And so Pre-Raphaelite works looked quite flat. And so critics took issue with that, and they said that they weren't, even though the Pre-Raphaelites were trying to be more realistic, that in the end, because they were so committed to what we call mimesis, which is picturing everything exactly as it seems, that they ended up producing works that were startlingly unnaturalistic. And so they were criticized for that. Another element of their work that we see in this show is that they were using regular working class models and they weren't idealizing their features. And so in a painting like The Annunciation, which is one of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's first oil paintings, he uses his sister Christina Rossetti as the figure, the model for the figure of the Virgin Mary, and he uses his brother William for the figure of the angel. And so the Annunciation is one of the most frequently pictured New Testament scenes. It's this moment where the angel comes and tells Mary that she's going to bear the child of God. And there was a very specific way, dating back to the Renaissance, of picturing this scene. And in the Annunciation, Gabriel completely rejects that. He puts William Michael and Christina in this little room. They're very close to each other. It's claustrophobic. Mary looks like she is not taking the news well. And because of that, because they looked like real people, everyday teenagers, critics found that that was offensive to, the piety associated with the New Testament.
And we're going to take a deeper dive into some of Dante Rossetti's other works when we return.
This is Wesley Paulson from Clear Space Theater giving a shout out to the 302 and thanking you for supporting live theater at the beach.
Welcome back. Now, Sophie, we were just talking about the Annunciation, very early work of Dante Rossetti, but he meets his muse, and that's where things just start really to take momentum for him, right?
So one of the other protagonists of this exhibition is Elizabeth Siddal. she first encountered the Pre-Raphaelites in the late 1840s when she started modeling for them. And she first really became known to the London public when she posed for John Everett Millet's painting, Ophelia. For anyone who has even had a passing exposure to the Pre-Raphaelites, you probably know this painting. And so shortly after Elizabeth Siddal modeled for Ophelia, she decided that she wanted to become an artist as well. And so there were not many options for women who wanted to train as professional artists in the 19th century. She couldn't enter the Royal Academy schools. They didn't accept women. So she had to find different ways of learning how to draw and paint. And so she trained with a couple of different Pre-Raphaelite artists. And over the course of the 1850s, she and Dante Gabriel Rossetti began a romantic relationship. And so during these years, they're working together in his studio, they're sharing materials, and there's clearly these ideas flowing back and forth between them. So if you look at these two works in the exhibition that we've put right next to each other by Elizabeth Siddal and by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, one is called Lady Affixing a Pennant to a Knight's Spear, and the other by Gabriel is called The Tune of Seven Towers. And so the first one is by Elizabeth Siddal. It's much smaller composition, and it shows a woman that's tying a pennant to the spear of a knight. And so the implication of the scene is that he's getting ready to leave and prepare for battle. It's a similar scene in The Tune of Seven Towers. We have a knight, we have a woman, there's a spear, and it's the preparations before this medieval battle. And so both works depict similar subjects. If you look at them closely, you'll see the color palettes of both works are also very similar. And this indicates that the works were produced at the same time and with the same materials. And you'll see that the compositions are quite similar. Those spears are diagonally bisecting the composition. But when you look at the dating, Elizabeth Siddal's was done first. And so for 150 years, scholars have positioned her work as derivative of that of her husband. But when we actually look at them side by side, we can see that she was initiating many of the themes they mutually explored.
When you look at not only the composition, but the colors and just the passion in the painting and in the subjects themselves, you can really see that their relationship kind of portrayed into their painting and was also inspired by literature. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So the Pre-Raphaelites were inspired by a whole host of different literary sources. And one of the writers that they were all interested in was the contemporary poet Alfred Tennyson. And both Gabriel and Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Elizabeth Siddal were frequently illustrating works by Tennyson. And so two works in the show illustrate a poem from Tennyson, The Palace of Art. And this was a really interesting moment for the couple because a publisher, Edward Moxon, was putting out a new anthology of Tennyson's poems that would have illustrations by the Pre-Raphaelites. And Elizabeth Siddal was so interested in contributing to what became known as the Moxon Tennyson, after the name of the publisher. And so in the show, you'll see a modest sketch called Saint Cecilia that illustrates that poem. And then you'll see a wood engraving by Dante Gabriel Rossetti that also illustrates the poem. And in the end, it was Dante Gabriel Rossetti's work that was selected to be in the Moxon Tennyson and not Elizabeth Siddal's. And so that was very disappointing for her.
Now there is a piece that depicts Elizabeth Siddal and her demise. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So that piece is called Beta Beatrix, And it was done in the aftermath of Elizabeth Siddal's tragic and premature death. In 1860, Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Elizabeth Siddal were married, and a year later, she delivered their stillborn daughter. And this was, of course, extremely distressing to the whole family. And after that, Elizabeth Siddal was prescribed laudanum, which was a mixture of opium and alcohol. Opium was really, laudanum in particular, was cheaply available, freely sort of accessible to people in Victorian London. It was used to treat a variety of ailments like toothaches, menstrual cramps, depression, insomnia, and Elizabeth Siddal became dependent on laudanum and died about 9 months after the stillbirth of a laudanum overdose. And so Dante Gabriel Rossetti pictures Elizabeth Siddal in Beta Beatrix as Beatrice, who is the medieval poet Dante Alighieri's unrequited and lost love. And so this painting is extremely moving because it pictures Elizabeth Siddal sort of in the process of dying. A bird is who's the messenger of death, is delivering a poppy, dropping a poppy flower into her hands. And the poppy is the flower from which opium was derived. And so this is quite a direct reference to Elizabeth Siddal's death.
It's very sad, very, very sad. When we return, we're going to have more on the Rosettis. Stay with us.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, and I love what's brewing on 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the Rosettis. Now, Sophie, how is it that this exhibit came together here in Wilmington?
A couple of years ago, my colleagues at the Tate, Carol Jacoby and James Finch, curators of this show at the Tate, reached out to Delaware Art Museum to say that they were putting together a show about the Rosettis and that they couldn't do the show without a few key paintings in Delaware Art Museum's collection. And so a proposal was made. If Delaware Art Museum would lend those key paintings to the Tate's show, would we be interested in being the only other venue to host this exhibition, the only venue in the United States to hold this major retrospective of the Rossetti family's work? And so this was a very easy yes for us, and we've been delighted to have this exhibition here in Delaware.
So in speaking about the pieces that they needed to do the exhibition, what pieces did you have that they just couldn't live without?
One of the pieces that the Tate was extremely keen to include in their exhibition was Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Lady Lilith, which is a painting that folks come from all around the world to see. It's one of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's double works of art, and these were works, paintings in particular, that he completed in the 1860s and 1870s, in which he paired poems that he wrote with paintings, and the poems and the paintings are in conversation with each other and elaborate on a shared subject. And so Lady Lilith shows this woman with long red hair combing it out and sort of absorbed with herself in the mirror. And it was based on a poem called Body's Beauty that he wrote in 1866. And the poem is actually inscribed on the frame. And so this painting attracted many crowds in London when it was displayed at the Tate earlier this year, and has had a celebrated homecoming here in Delaware for this exhibition.
So when you look at his work later in life, he really has a thing for redheads with all this red hair, long, voluminous, and this was a couple of people that were models for him, is that right?
Yeah, so Elizabeth Siddal was the original redhead, and then over the years he worked with a few other models with also sort of startling bright red hair. Fanny Cornforth was one of them. She modeled for the painting Found in our collection that the Tate was also very keen to borrow, as well as a painting Veronica Veronese that's in our collection, the painting Mona Vanna that's in Tate's collection. The list goes on. And then late in life, Dante Gabriel Rossetti begins to work with Jane Morris, who has rich, dark hair, and his paintings take on a different tenor with her as the central subject.
So you really can see, no matter at what stage you look at, just the passion that he had for doing things that were beautiful and different than what was out there.
Yeah, he was certainly an artistic renegade for his entire life.
Fantastic. Well, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this with us. We'll be right back. Isn't this gorgeous? I mean, look at the detail. Those angels are absolutely beautiful. When you come to the Delaware Art Museum to check out the Rosettis, make sure you snap a picture, maybe, I don't know, a selfie, and share it with us on Facebook. Now, here are some other things you might want to check out. For more information on the Rosettis or any of the wonderful exhibits here at the Delaware Art Museum, you can visit delart.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of the 302. Make sure you follow us on Facebook for more behind-the-scenes content you just won't see anywhere else. We're going to leave you now with a glimpse of the Wilmington skyline. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.